As he mentioned, my name is Del Spinmore. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. This is awesome. I'm excited to talk about this stuff. Let's jump in. So I'm going to show you kind of where I started with this whole journey. This is my family, by the way. They're all here today, which is awesome. They don't often get to make this kind of stuff. This is our backyard. So 4 years ago now, I knew nothing about gardening. I had tried to grow like 10 years ago, and I gave up after like 2 weeks. And the dandelions got taller than the tomatoes. And that was where I kind of came into gardening from. But 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, whenever I met my wife, she helped me understand that through some lifestyle adjustments, we could help to manage some of the anxiety and depression that I had been battling my whole life. And that was where this idea started, was that we started buying spinach and kale, and it got expensive in a hurry. And I heard a rumor that if you threw seeds in the ground and it rained a little bit, you'd have food. So that's kind of where this started. And we started here with just a couple little gardens. And as you can see, I have a very obsessive personality. And I got obsessed with all of this. And it grew, and it turned into this app that we built. So my wife and I started learning how to code last year, and we built this app to make it easy for everybody else to grow their own food as well. Because when we first started, it was so overwhelming. There was so much information out there, and I feel like I tried to read all that I could of it, and at the end of that, we wanted a place to put all that information. We had spreadsheets and things like that, and we wanted to have a way to get that out into the world. So I want to start by showing the app that we have now, and then I'm going to walk through how to start growing food using the app, because we've built the app to walk you through the entire process. I'm going to show you how you can do that. So. On the first tab, whenever you open the app, you're going to see a list of, I'll just leave it where it is, a list of plants. We have 80 different plants in the app right now. We're adding new plants all the time. Carrie is actually the one that adds all of them into the app. She learned how to code as well, so she can do this. And she added 10 trees in there last week. So we're always adding new stuff in. Once you choose what you want to grow, so beans, for example, we will give you a short description at the top that is our little summary of why you should care about these beans, basically, or whatever it is. And then I'll get to this burpee thing here in a second, but I want to show you first, we have planting dates that are calculated. And what we do is we find the nearest weather station. We have a database of over 5,000 weather stations from across the country, and we have the past 100 years worth of data for that weather station. And we can cycle through that and determine, based on this data, these are the dates we've calculated as far as when it's most likely, based on relative to when it's going to freeze first and when you should plant that plant. So you can actually go in and adjust if you want. You can tap on settings, and you can go in and adjust these dates if you want to play it a little risky, and you can mess around with all that if you'd like. I'm a geek. I had to build that into it because typically we push things a little early. So the dates you see in the app are the safe dates. I'm typically planting stuff sometimes a month earlier than these because I'm covering them. I'm doing stuff like that. But by default, it's going to guide you down the safe path. So as you scroll down more, we show you all the information that you need about how to grow this. So square foot gardening is a method that we started with that makes it really simple to start growing food because it lets you divide your raised beds up into sections and then treat those individual sections as their own little garden plots in a way. And what this does is a couple of things. One, it makes it really easy to do companion planting, which if you want to avoid using chemicals in your garden, that's something you pretty much have to do because that's what keeps the pests away and causes a lot of other issues from happening. But also what it lets you do is it lets you move crops around easily. So you don't grow the same thing in the same place time after time, which again causes a lot of pest issues and disease issues and things like that. So I'm a big fan of square foot gardening. These spaces let you divide up a square. So with beans, it's 9 per square. With basil, it's 4 per square. Every plant has its number, and we show you that number there. And there's actually this really cool product we linked to in the app called the seeding square that makes it easy. So you can lay that over the garden. So if it's 9 per square, you put a hole in every yellow, and if it's red, you know. And the cool thing about this too is we taught our 2-year-old how to count with this, and her colors and all of that was with this device. You know, it was a pretty cool way of teaching her those things early on. So that's square foot gardening, and it makes it really simple to get started because it takes out all of the memorization of things, and it's not, you're not so, you know, you can move things around and you can play around with different things. And in the beginning, you know, we tried pretty much everything you could grow, at least one of it, and that allowed us to do that. Whereas before with traditional gardening, If you put something in a bed and it was all that one thing, well, then you were kind of locked into having a bunch of tomatoes. So it makes it a little more fun. So we also show you the time to harvest. This is kind of the overall time to harvest for that food in general. Specific varieties within that food have their own, that varies. And we have those that I'll show you here in a minute that we pull in from Burpee. We have an integration now with Burpee where we pull in all 1,500 varieties of their seeds and let you filter, and I'll show all that here in a second. We show you the sun requirements. So some plants like to be full sun, some like shade. They all have their own requirements. We show you that here. Watering. So right now, we give you a text description telling you how to water. I've never felt like this is good enough from the beginning we released the app, and that's why this is one of the core things that we're building into the next version of our software that's going to be releasing in the spring, that will actually send you reminders telling you when to water based on how much it's rained where you are. So no longer do you have to wonder or guess or try. I want to take this section out altogether and just tell you when to water based on that information. So that's what we're working on, and that's part of that My Garden feature that we're going to be releasing throughout the spring. As you scroll down, we show you all the information about how to plant that. So let's talk about planting for a second, because different plants need to be started in different ways. Some plants really like to be started outdoors by seed. And if you start them indoors and move them, or if you buy a transplant and plant that, they just don't do well at all. Carrots and beets and anything that likes to grow roots is a prime example of that. Don't ever transplant those. Beans too. Beans don't like to transplant. They like to be started by seed. Some plants don't care. Kale can go either way. You can start it by seed or you can transplant. Same with broccoli and cabbage. So that's what this section is here, is it tells you that. And it tells you how deep to plant the seed, how long it'll take it to sprout, and how tall the plant will get once it's mature. Which is important because you don't want to shade out other things. Which is when you're starting out, it's really important to really consider where the sun is going to be and what's going to get shaded out, what's not going to get sun. And that's something else that it's not going to be in this next version of our software, but eventually we will start making it easier for you to know where to plant based on, you can put where your house is and we calculate where the sun's going to be. That's the kind of stuff we want to move into. So lastly, we show you the family. That's important because you don't want to repeat the same crop of a family in the same place time after time. So this makes it easy for you. Again, the next version of our software is going to eliminate this. You're going to hear this theme, I think, as I go, because this is the kind of things that I want to make, that we want to make just completely simple, where you don't have to think about these kind of things. But lastly, we show you how to harvest, how to cook, and how to save the seeds from things. This is important because when we first started, we got really good at growing some of this stuff, but we didn't figure out how to make it taste good. And that's where, Carrie has spent a lot of time going through and scouring the internet, trying to find all of the recipes and trying them. Our kitchen is a test kitchen. It's constantly, she's got something new she's trying or something new she's found. She found like 27 ways to make zucchini. And they're all in the app, and we have blog posts and videos for most of them. So that's the kind of stuff that we talk about here. We talk about how to harvest. Saving seeds is awesome because then you can just take that plant and then reuse it year after year. Not everything lets you do that, but we walk you through that. And lastly, we have links down here at the bottom to products on Amazon. And this is how the app is free, is that we're able to support it through things like this. So as you tap on things to buy through here, we get a small percentage of that, and that's what we use to hopefully make this a business as we continue to expand. So at the very top, we give you a recommendation for the right size smart pot that grows that's for that vegetable. And I haven't talked about smart pots yet, and this gives me an opportunity to kind of back up and talk about the idea of getting started. So I'm going to back out of the plant section for a second and show you this getting started tab that we have that talks about getting started out. We've already talked about some of these concepts like choosing location, but let's talk about containers and where you actually grow this food and all of that, right? So if you're starting out, you're not really sure, where do I put all this stuff? So there's a couple different ways you can go. We started out by planting our gardens in raised bed that are sitting on top of the ground. The biggest issue with that our first year was Bermuda grass, because I spent all of my time trying to fight that Bermuda grass, and I kind of liked gardening, but I kind of hated the Bermuda grass, so it was kind of a love-hate relationship. And that second year, we really devoted to how do we make this enjoyable the entire time, and that's when we discovered cardboard and wood chips. And I covered the entire yard in cardboard and a foot of wood chips. And that may sound like the price would be astronomical for that, but wood chips are free at the Norman compost facility. I think Midwest City may also have them, but I've not done that personally, so I can't vouch for that. But Norman, I got a load of wood chips every other day for like 6 months. And that was I worked from home for the most part, so that was my lunch workout, was unloading wood chips and then taking them and dumping them on cardboard. And we did our entire backyard basically, and that was how we got the Bermuda to quiet down. Now it still pops up here and there. I've still got to fight it, but it's really like, it's not rooted real well in the wood chips, so I just kind of yank it up and laugh at it and throw it over the fence. It's not, it's no big deal anymore. So, and then the thing about this wood chips, there's this whole gardening method called Back to Eden gardening. I encourage you to look into it. It's really interesting, and the idea is that we can replicate the forest in non-forest locations to get the results of the forest. What I mean by that is if you go down to Lake Thunderbird or any of these hiking trails and you go, look, everything is beautiful, and there's trees packed right next to each other and no one's fertilizing it. How does that happen, right? No one's out there taking care of that. So if you really start studying that and how that's happening, you quickly discover that on the bottom of the surface, there's a layer of leaves and twigs and all this organic matter that breaks down, and the soil is beautiful. So you can do that same thing in your backyard just by covering the ground with cardboard and then wood chips. And then the worms will come up, eat the cardboard, and then after a year, where it was like a foot of wood chips, you'll have maybe 9 inches of soil that's really nice, and then 3 inches of wood chips. And that soil is really, really nice. You can plant directly in it. So that first year we had plants that were in raised beds kind of scattered everywhere. Second year we started planting things kind of directly in the ground around the raised beds. And now we're continuing to do that same thing. So it's a great way to get started. If you want to go the route of doing raised beds, building things, all that kind of stuff. But what I discovered our second year were these smart pots, which are these fabric raised beds. They're made here in Oklahoma City, actually. And I was super skeptical when I first saw them because I thought there's no way these things are going to survive July in Oklahoma. They get way too hot. That's not going to work. And I actually got 2 of them and I buried one. Next, I planted one like this and the other one I buried in the ground to compare them side by side to see how they would do. And sure enough, this one beat the other ones. So that piqued my interest. So I started talking to some of my professor friends trying to understand how this happened. And long story short, it's simple. These plants get more air because they're able to take in air from the side. So it's just like a car. You pump more air into it, it performs better. But also just like a car, when you have a high-performance car, it takes more gas, so this takes more water. So there is a trade-off. These do take a little more watering than my raised beds, but I've automated all my watering. It's not a big deal to me. And another way that you can really make it simple with these smart pots is to get, these are larger ones, but they have small ones too. They're like 5-gallon and things like that. Take those and put them inside of a kiddie pool, and then fill that kiddie pool with 1 inch or 2 of water. And then you don't want it to sit in water for days at a time. That's not good for the roots, and the roots have to dry out a little bit. But you fill it up before you leave for work, let it drink on it for the day. If it's dry by the time you go to bed that night, that's you put the right amount in. So, and it's a really simple way to sub-irrigate without having to build all these, I tried the whole sub-irrigation things where I went to Lowe's and I bought a bunch of different ways to build things, and it was complicated, and this is a really easy way to do that, especially in July in Oklahoma, trying to keep things watered if you're not able to be around it. So that's what smart pots are, and we recommend, on each page for each vegetable, the right size smart pot for that one. If you do a big one like this, it doesn't matter. You can mix and match and all that kind of stuff, but if you just want to have one for that plant, we recommend it. Also, we're going to be giving some away at the end of this, so if you have not got a ticket yet, Janae has tickets she's giving out, and we'll be giving away smart pots as soon as we're done here. So let's go back to the app now and talk through some of the other aspects of growing. So we were looking at beans before. Let's go to something that's actually in season right now that we could actually start growing right now. Because believe it or not, although this weekend, I probably would not start anything with this cold that just came through, but as soon as this cold front kind of goes away, you could actually go out and plant kale seeds and spinach seeds right now. Kale comes from Russia. It does not mind this cold at all. It laughs at it. It's been out in my garden all winter. I planted it in November, and it survived over the winter. And then it's been out there unprotected all winter, and now it's starting to put out new leaves. I mean, kale is as hardy as it comes. Spinach is right behind kale as far as being able to survive our winters. It's really hardy. Most all of mine survived. Now, it does not produce a lot over the winter, so you're not going to be able to eat on it, really count on it as being able to eat from it in December and January. But it will really start producing a lot in February and March. Whereas if you start seeds for spinach right now, it's going to be end of March, maybe April, before you really get some. So the way that we like to do our greens like that is we'll start half of them in the fall, let them overwinter, and then we get an early batch from that. The problem with those is they're the first ones to go to seed when it gets hot, because they've already had a winter, so they're ready to peace out, like they're good to go. But the other ones that you start in the spring, they haven't seen a winter yet, so they're ready for, they're ready to keep going as long as they can. So you get two different mixes going, and that's how we're able to have greens pretty much into June. There's also, so kind of in line with this, I talked about kale and spinach, and those are the two of the greens that I like to grow the most. Kind of getting back to the idea of why we started growing food, about the mental health side of it. Spinach and kale are two of the things that really help with anxiety and depression because they have a lot of magnesium and calcium, and that's a big regulator for things like that. So that's why we grow a ton of it. As far as nutrition per inch, it's packed. Those two are about as good as you can get, so I like to maximize. If I'm gonna go through all this work, I wanna maximize the amount of nutrition I'm getting out of it. So we like to eat a lot of that. But we also grow lettuces, and lettuce can do well later into the year than spinach can. Now kale can go into the summer and survive. It just gets a little bitter. But there's lettuces, especially ones that are bred for places like Las Vegas, that can do well in the heat. Check out in the app too. So I guess this is a good place to talk about varieties and things like that, because once you pick out that you say, I want to grow spinach, well, now you've got to decide like, where do I go with spinach, right? Or say you want to grow lettuce, because there's way more lettuce than there is spinach. So if I go to lettuce in the app, and I tap on it, and I go to this Varieties tab, so this will show you all of the varieties that Burpee has. And if you haven't heard of Burpee, they are the largest seed company in the country. They've been around since 1850, a long time, since the 1800s. And they are the ones that pioneered a lot of the tomatoes you've heard about, like Better Boy, and all these hybrids, and all a hybrid means is really just taking one tomato, another tomato, and breeding them together. There's no genetic mutation happening, nothing like that. They don't do anything GMO. This is all just science we've been doing for hundreds of years in botany. And they're the ones that have developed a lot of these tomatoes you've heard about. So we partnered with them when we pulled in all of their varieties, and you can come in here and you can filter the list. So for lettuce, you can see here's all the different types of lettuce that they have available. Instead of having to scroll that whole list and figure out where do I start, this kind of gives you a place to start from, right? Because you want to grow lettuce. You look at this, you say, well, I guess I like romaine lettuce, I'll start there. So then you can tap it, and now we filter the list down. You can see all the different romaines they have available. It's still a pretty decent list, but it's a lot easier to choose from than that wall of 200 varieties. Because when I first started growing food, and I came to websites like this, I wanted to cry because my OCD makes me want to try all of them, and I didn't know where to start. And so I wanted to build a tool that could help other people that are like me, that wanted a way to go in and see just what do I start with. And this first iteration lets you filter down by types, but what we're working on releasing next is making it easier to know, okay, what actually is going to do well for me? So recommending varieties that do well for that region, right? So those are things we're working towards. If you go to tomatoes, you can see what type of tomatoes do well for paste or for salsa, things like that. So we're really excited about this partnership with Burpee, and we feel like we can really innovate the seed buying process and make it not feel so overwhelming and just friendlier, and hopefully just change the way people feel about buying seeds. Because right now I get like every catalog and I look through all of them and I just get so overwhelmed. I don't end up ordering all the ones I want to. So if we can make a one-stop shop, we just kind of tap here and say, send me all the ones that are best for me. And you're off to kind of the right start. So let's talk about companion plants for a second, because we touched on this earlier, but one of the key concepts with gardening is some plants don't like to be next to other plants. And some plants really like to be next to other plants. So there's this idea of an ecosystem that you have to maintain. And this is one of the things when I first started that was super overwhelming, because I was trying to memorize this goes with this, and this doesn't go with that. And then I planted peas next to garlic, and then I read like a month later, and then they'd already sprouted. So I was like, what do I do? And it's like a panic attack. So anyway, that's where this feature came from, was a way to keep track of what things grow well next to each food. So that's what this is. It's a list of all the things that grow well next to lettuce. So you can look at that. So what this makes it easy is when you're planting your garden, I'm gonna grow lettuce. Well, what next? Well, when I think through that, I go into here and I go into this tab and I start looking through and I find something else. Like, okay, carrots, I know they're in season, now I'll start there. Then you can tap on carrots and go to that page and then start planting from there. So it's a way to plan your garden easily. And then on that same point, you can also see what does not grow well next to it. So you know what to avoid and how you can keep from making mistakes in your garden. To that same note, so each plant has its own pests that like to attack it. And the problem is that there's going to be a lot of bugs that come to your garden, and not all of them are pests, and it's hard to know which ones are good, which ones are bad. And I spent a lot of time emailing photos to the Cleveland County Extension saying, what is this, when I first started. So basically, we just took that knowledge, and we've actually brought in the person I learned from that to help with the app to build the database. And she's the smartest bug person I've ever met in my life. She knows everything about bugs. And we brought her in to help us build out our database so that you can go to a plant and you can see which plants attack that, or which pests attack that plant. And then from there, you can tap on the pest, and we'll tell you about how we treat it in our garden without chemicals. So we've been able to get by without using any pesticides in our garden. We've done it through companion planting, through things like this insect netting, which is huge. We have a guide on our YouTube that shows you how you can build a little PVC dome to make these. This BT caterpillar killer. So it looks like a chemical because it comes in a bottle, but it's not. This is a naturally occurring soil bacteria that when caterpillars eat it, it kills them. So they've harvested that, they put it in a bottle, you put it in some liquid, you put it on your plant. It does not affect humans at all. It's made, it attacks caterpillars. So there's a lot of things like that you can do. For aphids, well, aphids are easy, you can spray them off. But if they get really bad, ladybugs eat them. So you can buy ladybugs on Amazon. There's just a lot of little tricks you can do with any type of, rodent, with birds and things like that. With cats, you can use motion-activated sprinklers. You just have a sprinkler that's set up at the garden. You walk in front of it, it sprays. There's a lot of things like that that you can do where you just kind of use nature to your advantage to fight pests without having to use chemicals. You don't have to use chemicals. We've gone 4 years now without using any in our garden. And yes, we have some bugs, but I plant way more than I need, and I let the bugs have some, but they're never overwhelming. Nature regulates itself. Once you start spraying chemicals on your plants, what you've done is now you've taken a hand in controlling what happens in the ecosystem. The problem is you killed a lot of the good bugs too. So now you've got to be the one to play police. Whereas if you just leave them all alone, it's like Star Wars. The good guys always win. Like the bad guys come back and there's some fights, but if you just hang around, the good guys will always win. That's how it works out in the garden. And you'll see more spiders show up, and you'll see more praying mantises and soldier bugs and all these other bugs that will just show up and will start helping you out. But you got to be patient. It doesn't happen overnight. You might be stressing about some aphids sometimes, but I will sometimes leave aphids on a plant just so I know that the ladybugs need it, so the ladybugs won't leave, And it's really nice. When I first started gardening, I felt like I had to control everything, and I had spreadsheets, and I built an app, obviously. But the longer I garden, the more I realize once you start doing it, it becomes second nature, and you just we've been doing this for thousands of years, right? So you just kind of remember somehow. It's weird how it works, and it just becomes second nature. And then eventually, you get a secret, you're not going to need this app in a couple of years. But this will be here to help you get started. So then once it does become second nature, you're kind of ready to go. So another thing I want to mention is for each pest, for each plant, for all the things in the app, if you go to this More Info tab, we pull in the things from our website that reference that. So Carrie works harder on Seed to Spoon than I do, I promise. And she is adding blog posts every single day to our website about this kind of stuff. So, how to grow mustard greens or beneficial insects, or maybe it's a recipe, or, I never know what it's going to be. She surprises me all the time with what's up there. And that pulls in here automatically for that vegetable or for that pest. So all the ones that are related to that will pull in here. And you can also, for that pest, tap here to see what the affected plants are. So you can see what all plants that pest is going to attack. So that if you see some cabbage worms and you see, on one plant, okay, I need to go check the broccoli too to see maybe if it has an issue. So that's a way you can help with pest prevention. Which, let's talk about pest prevention a little bit, because aside from, some of the stuff we talked about here, there's some just overall strategies that can help with it. And again, back to companion planting. And the reason for that is that pests find what they're looking for through their sense of smell. So if you have an entire bed full of tomatoes, and a tomato hornworm moth is flying around, it's going to have a really easy time finding those tomatoes because they're all right there, right? But if you have a bed that has one tomato, and then it has some rosemary and some sage, and has broccoli, and has all these different things in it, especially things that are strong scented, like rosemary and sage and oregano that put up these strong scents, they're confused. And they might find one tomato, but they're not going to find all of them. And they're not going to spread like crazy. And those are the concepts, companion planting that we use to help regulate pests as well. And the same principle applies to diseases, basically, not with the smell part, but with the, So back to our list of vegetables again. Let's talk about, okay, good, we still have some time. So let's talk about what all we can actually start growing here soon and kind of go through the season, and I'll pretend I'm planting my garden and we'll just kind of go from there. So I've talked about spinach, kale, lettuce. So that kind of covers the early season stuff of what you start earliest in the season outdoors. But let's step back a minute and talk about indoor gardening, because when I first started, it sounded overwhelming, not something I would do, but it's something we do a lot of now, and it saves us a lot of time and a lot of money, and it was not hard to get started with. And basically the idea is, if we took a wire rack, it's a wire shelf, and put lights on it, we could start our own seeds and not have to buy plants from nurseries anymore. Or we could also have more selection. So a lot of times, especially once I got started, I wanted to try varieties of something I couldn't find it, but I was able to order seeds and then start my own. So with the grow light system, again, we have a video on our YouTube that shows you all about how we set ours up, but it makes it really simple to start seeds indoors, and it's not super expensive to get started. The wire shelf is something we got off Craigslist or something for not too much. Again, the grow lights, again, we got off Craigslist. A lot of people are converting to LED lighting right now, so they're getting rid of these old fluorescent lights, so I was able to get really good deals on those. And we built the whole thing for less than 150 bucks. And we've got 5 shelves in there, and we're able to grow all of our seeds. And the reason why you need to start some things indoors is because the growing season for it may be longer than we're gonna have in Oklahoma before it gets hot. So for broccoli, for example, it can take 90 to 110 days for you to get a good head of broccoli off of it. Well, if you start it outdoors whenever it's not too cold, if you wait until then sometimes it's too hot before it's able actually to do that. So if you start that broccoli indoors and give it like a month indoors and then transplant it outside, you've bought yourself an extra month. So that's the idea behind why you would want to start stuff indoors at all. Now, broccoli and cabbage, things that are typically started indoors, can also be started outside. And I've started doing that more because I've adjusted the way I view broccoli and cabbage, both. I used to think about them before, broccoli as this big head I bought from the store, and cabbage as a big head I bought from the store, and it was like one item. I don't think about them that way anymore. I moved to more sprouting broccolis. So they put off a bunch of side shoots and things like that that are tiny little heads. But the thing is, they do that starting at like 60 days-ish, and they do that continuously for a long time. So I get way more broccoli off of it. And it's not the standard like huge head like I'm used to, but it's just as much flavor. They have all different types. It's easier to grow. I'm not having to, hope there's not a big hailstorm that takes out my broccoli at 90 days when it was almost, like that kind of stuff that constantly happened. And then the thing about it, I want to mention about the hailstorm. So the reason why I mentioned that specifically is so the first year we were growing broccoli, we had a hailstorm come in and knock out all my broccoli plants, and I was devastated. And then I learned you could eat broccoli leaves. So I had all these decimated broccoli plants, so we started eating the leaves. Then I discovered I like that more than broccoli. So if you take broccoli leaves and you chop them up, it tastes like the inside of an egg roll. If you stir fry that, it's amazing. So then I started liking that part of broccoli more. So this is kind of where our ideas on broccoli evolved from. We're trained to eat things that are grown within the commercial system, and we're all kind of used to food being that way. But once you start growing it yourself, you step out of that system, and now it's what is the most efficient way for me to grow food, right? So then you start getting into some of these other like sprouting broccoli, sprouting kales. Kale and broccoli are related. There's crosses between them. They're awesome. Broccoli is one. So you can get all these different types of things that you can mix in. So once my thinking about broccoli adjusted, I stopped thinking about just trying to grow this one large broccoli plant, and I started thinking, I want to grow more broccoli, right? But the problem with broccoli is the spacing on it is every 18 inches. So if you stick to that, then that's going to mean that you are not going to, why isn't that section showing? Found a bug in the middle of this, of course I did. So with 18 inches, it means that in that bed, you're only going to be able to fit like 4 or 5 in there, tops. And if you're waiting until like 100 days to get ahead, it's just not, you're going to give up on gardening pretty quick, because you're not going to get a lot of food out of it. But with these other methods, you're able to get a lot more. So, and especially if you adjust the way that you think about planting it. So if you sprinkle a lot of broccoli seeds, and then as they come up, now as they're coming up, those are microgreens. Have you heard microgreens, like that term? Broccoli is a plant that is packed full of a lot of chemicals that are very good for you. And those microgreens are especially good for you because it has the entire plant's worth of nutrition stuffed into that tiny little plant. So it's really like maximizing that one little location. And what you can do is you can plant a bunch of broccoli around, sprinkled everywhere, and then as they start to grow, let the biggest one remain, and then thin down everything around it, and it's survival of the fittest, and then you eat the thinnings as you chop them, and then you get way more broccoli out of your space rather than, you know, marking off 18 inches around this and leaving that empty and not, it just feels like a waste of space. So that's the way that we grow broccoli now. And to that point, cabbage is much the same way. I really don't grow head cabbage anymore. I've switched to more of the Asian cabbages. They're more of the tall leaf cabbages, or the more the bok choy type style. There's more nutrition in it. It's just easier to grow. Those giant cabbage heads, I'm always fighting bugs on them or hailstorms or something. So I like more the Napa cabbage styles, and we've switched to those. So we've talked about greens, we've talked about broccoli and cabbage. Those are the main staples of the early season cool stuff. But then you also have this whole class of plants that are more like, so they like to grow underground. So carrots and beets and radishes, things of that nature. They also do well early in the season. Not quite as early as spinach and kale, but we're starting to get in the time for those as well. So the thing about carrots and beets and a lot of these is the most difficult part about growing them is getting them to germinate. Once they're germinated, it's pretty easy. Just kind of leave them alone, they grow. But to get them to germinate, which means just a sprout, it takes, especially in the early season, up to 21 days for a carrot seed to sprout, and the seed has to stay relatively moist that entire time. So if you go a couple days, or if you forget, or if there's, you know, like in February, we'll get a random 80-degree day, or, you know, like a 70-degree day, you never know, and things will dry out in a hurry. So that's the biggest problem with carrots, is getting them to sprout. So some ways you can help with that is by using straw mulch. You can put that over it. You can use burlap, cover it. You can do things like that. But that's the biggest challenge with carrots. Once you get them to germinate, it's not too bad. And again, our app will guide you through that. And the way you grow carrots is pretty much the same as you grow beets and radishes and everything else. One thing to really pay attention to with these, though, is that the soil mix that you use is loose. And let's step back for a minute and talk about soil mix. So we've talked about containers. We've talked about everything else. We haven't talked about what you put inside of the containers. So in this getting started section, we have this, this fill containers with soil mix. So you've got a couple different options. You can go buy soil at the store. If you're going to do that, make sure you buy something that's called a potting mix that has either vermiculite or perlite in it. For these containers, you need to have that in there. It really helps with moisture retention issues if you don't have it in there. That's going to get expensive in a hurry, buying that potting mix. I did it for like one, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. My wife told me I couldn't do it anymore, so a couple factors there. But we started figuring out, you know, how can we make our own soil mix? And this is where the Square Foot Gardening book taught us this mix, this mixture here. So we started with equal parts of vermiculite, peat moss, and compost. This is what we started with. We've adjusted from this a little bit because vermiculite is very expensive. It's $30 for a bag. So at the scale that we were growing to, we just really couldn't afford to keep buying at that ratio. And we've seen good success by adjusting. So what we do now is more of a 50% compost and then about 20 and half on both of those. So we've just upped the compost. So the one thing I want to mention about compost here, out of all these ingredients here, these two don't provide any nutrients to the plants. They're simply for having proper soil consistency. That's all they're there for. This is where the plants get all their food from, is the compost. It's the most important part out of all of it. You can make your own compost. When you're starting out, you're not going to be able to make enough to be able to really get started. It's going to take a long time, like up to a year to make a bunch. So you got, when you're starting out, you've pretty much got to buy that. You could go to, you know, the bad compost and stuff you see at the store. Avoid that. That stuff is just complete trash. It's not something I would go with. When you're dealing with compost, I would try and find a source locally. So we have a number of great sources here because we have a lot of cattle farms and all that. So all that stuff goes somewhere, and well, it goes to where you can buy it, and you can spend $100 a truckload on it, which sounds crazy to spend that much on what it is, but it works really well. And Mimic Materials is where I typically go to get mine. There's some other places around, Murphy Compost. There's a couple places around. The first year that I got compost, I was getting it kind of wherever, and I was buying off Craigslist and just kind of doing some stuff like that. And I ended up poisoning all of my tomato plants accidentally because the compost that I was getting was being made from horse manure that was from horses that were eating on fields that were sprayed with herbicide. And that herbicide goes straight through the horse into the manure and lasts there for 3 years, and found its way right into my tomatoes. And that was when my thinking on compost changed, and I stopped bringing in outside compost unless I could test it before I used it, and I started using more of my own. But I tested Mimic a lot. I tested it quite a bit, and I really believe in theirs. I've had good success with it, so I test it again every year, because you never know. You never know what could happen and they don't honestly know what's happening. The horse owners aren't doing this on purpose. That they're not aware that it lasts forever. They just don't get me started on all that. So anyway, you can also get compost. You can save some money from getting it from places like at local compost facilities, like Norman has it. That first year kind of made me shy of that because that compost is made from golf course clippings and yard clippings and all sorts of stuff, and who knows what's going into that, and it just it wrecked me when it killed all my tomatoes. I put a lot of work into that, so I don't want to go through that again. So another thing we've done is we've started growing a lot more things that help us make our own compost material. Things that produce a lot of foliage that's high in nutrients that we can put in compost. So I have a ton of comfrey that we grow just for the purpose of having compost material. So I'm not going to get too much into that, but if you want to know more about that, just go on our website and type compost, and we've got a bunch of videos that show all that kind of stuff. I show you how we build our own compost bins for pretty much free. We took pallet lumber and tore it apart and made compost bins from that. So I've got all that kind of stuff on there. So we've got so let's talk about... All right, so let's talk about some other things that are coming up to be planted soon. So we talked through root crops. The next big thing that's going to be coming up to be planted is going to be the perennials thing. So what I mean by perennials, it comes back year after year, right? So a good time to plant things like that come back year after year is going to be early enough in the spring that the roots can get settled before it gets hot, or after it gets hot, but enough time before it gets super cold. So we have like two main windows to plant things like trees and blackberries and raspberries and things like that. Now you can get away planting it other times. This takes a lot more work because you got to it's just more things can go wrong. So the optimal times to plant are coming up for blackberries and raspberries and all sorts of things like that. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how to plant those. Again, the app will guide you through how to plant all these things. So if you have any questions, check out the app. I just want to kind of cover kind of a high level what's coming up so y'all know kind of how to strategize and what to plan and all of that. I'm going to show you another feature we have. So this filter here actually lets you filter down and see what things are in season. So you can see can be planted now. Unfortunately, there's nothing today that can be planted, so this will be blank. Really soon, we're going to have a feature that lets you plant to can be planted soon. That shows things upcoming. And we're also going to have weekly notifications that send you a notification telling you this is everything that's availably planted this week. And then it takes you into the app with that list filtered. So that kind of stuff is coming. But for now, I'm going to filter down to cool season and perennial because that's the season we're going into. And let's kind of look through the list and just kind of see what else we can talk about here that's coming up. Garlic you can actually plant outside right now. I'll go ahead and mention that. Garlic is typically planted in the fall and then overwinters, and then it comes up because garlic requires a certain number of freezing days in order to produce large bulbs. But last year we planted garlic mid-January, and we had plenty in June. So another thing that's interesting about garlic that I want to mention that you can do, if you want to plant garlic in March or in April, you can actually trick the garlic by taking some cloves, putting a bunch of soil in a bag, putting those garlic cloves in soil, putting that in the freezer for 3 weeks. The garlic gets tricked thinking, and then you take that soil, go plant that out, and then the garlic will do better. So I want to mention that on garlic. It's not too late for garlic. Let's talk about peas, because peas are the member of the legume family. And the reason why I mention that is it's a really important family to make sure you have in your garden, because it does a couple of things. One, they're peas and beans. So like they're great things to grow. But two, they help other plants in your garden because members of that family can take nitrogen out of the air and put it into the soil, which is rare. Most plants cannot do that. They need to eat nitrogen. It's their main source of food, but they cannot produce their own nitrogen. But these plants can. So by having peas and beans around plants that need a lot of nitrogen, that's another way you can use companion planting. Companion planting has a lot of aspects, and this is another one of it, where you can use plants like that to help fertilize your other plants that are looking for that. So peas do best when grown vertically. Same with beans, at least pole beans. There's bush beans too that kind of contain themselves, but Peas and pole beans. I've tried a lot of different trellis ways as far as how to get things up off the ground and how to get them vertical. I've tried all the ways I could find, and my favorite one that I've landed on is this. It's really simple, and it's super cheap. You just take T-posts that I find them on the side of the road all the time, a 6-foot T-post, stick them in the ground about 4 feet apart, and then they have this concrete remesh that you can get at Home Depot. It's like $8 for a panel. It's a 4x8 panel, and it's just this metal, concrete remesh wire, and you take that and you just hold it vertically to the T-post and just zip tie it all the way down with a lot of zip ties. And that has worked amazing for us as a trellis. It's super cheap. I mean, it's less than $10 to put together, assuming you can find the T-post. And that's what we use for most of ours. So some plants don't get super tall. I'll trellis them where it's laying down landscape, and it's not as tall. Other ones I'll put portrait, and it'll go portrait. You understand what I'm saying. And it goes tall ways, and things like cucumber. Another thing you can do is Tractor Supply has cattle panels, 14-foot cattle panels. You can take them, put one in the ground, and then arch it over and make an arch. And that's a really nice way to grow beans too, and things like loofah, because they grow over the cattle panel, they hang down. It's kind of cool looking. If you like orb weaver spiders, they like to hang out there. We're big. They help your garden though. Orb weavers are really good for your garden. I still haven't got the nerve to actually pet one. Carrie wouldn't let me. She was freaking out when I was trying to. She wouldn't let me. So I don't know. I feed them. I do. So squash bugs make me so mad. So I will take all of them in a bucket and just go throw them into an orb weaver web. I've got videos of it on our page. Go check it out. I love it. I do slow motion videos of orb weavers eating things. I'm a weird person. It's cool though. She was awesome. What was her name? What did we name her? Nellie. Nellie Furtado had a song called Man Eater. And orb weavers eat their mates. So that's, yeah. So that was the name. Sorry. We like orb weavers. You should have one. No, you just gotta, they'll just show up and then feed them. They'll make new ones. Yeah, it's just, you can't order them yet though. Maybe we need to go in the orb weaver business. We're missing out. All right, so let's talk through, herbs. We haven't talked through herbs. So herbs are another source of perennials. So I was mentioning the trees and the raspberries and all that stuff earlier. It's kind of in the same category. It's the right time to plant them. We actually have an herb class that is dedicated to how to cook and grow with 10 different herbs right at our booth right there that we did all weekend. We're doing again tomorrow, and we'll have videos up on our website. But I just want to kind of briefly talk through a few different herbs because herbs are one of our favorite things to grow. Number one, they really help with pest prevention. Again, they're strong scented. That helps keep pests away from the plants you're trying to protect. But also, they're just incredible for you. You have some of the best health benefits you can find in plants are in oregano and sage and rosemary and some of these things. So I feel like by eating those, I'm eating my medicine in a way. The nice thing that's about them too is you can use them to make your food taste better. So when we first started growing food, we were really excited when we started getting zucchini out of our garden. But then after 2 weeks, we were so tired of having zucchini cooked the exact same way. So that's why Carrie started trying to come up with 27 different ways to make it. But part of that involved using herbs to start flavoring things to taste different. So you can take oregano, for example, and put in a dish. It makes something taste completely different than basil or sage or, insert different herb. And you can also do things like make pestos. So you can take the leaves from oregano or sage or rosemary, rosemary not so much, but basil especially, any of those broad leaves, you can take those leaves and you can chop them up and then you can run them in a food processor with olive oil and pine nuts and Parmesan cheese, and then you have pesto. It tastes incredible, and so those are some of the ways we like to use herbs to make things taste good. So let's give away some Smart Pots. I'm being gestured. Okay, let's do it. All right, so what do we got here? All right, so we mentioned Smart Pots earlier. If you don't have a raffle, okay. So we've got a 20-gallon Smart Pot. This would be really good for having a mix of plants in it. You can fit more than one in here. Or if you want to grow a lot of potatoes, this is a really good solution. And the nice thing about growing potatoes and sweet potatoes in this is when it comes time to harvest, you can just dump it out and then let your kids dig for potatoes, and they love doing that. And if you grow potatoes in the ground, it can be a pain because you got to dig them out. And as you're doing that, you can break them. So I really like these for potatoes. You could put a little kitchen herb collection in here of different types. So this is a 20-gallon, and I guess I'll keep talking for a minute about the other ones, and then we've got a 15-gallon. This one, again, like potatoes, or if you wanted to do like a really big tomato, you could put it in here. It really doesn't need to have that big one, though, that big of one. And then we've got a 7-gallon, a couple 7-gallons. All right, let's just start giving them away now. So the 20-gallon first, and the ticket number is 153. All right, next, 151. Got a winner. Okay, next up, we have a 7-gallon, 130.
Next.
122. All right. There you go. 125. 7-gallon again. 125. 116. There you go. Next one. 138. 134. 158. 135.
Why are you thinking does?
I don't know. I don't know how many people left. 136. 152. Oh my gosh. 159. 139. 139, okay. 143. Okay, there we go. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming out. If you have any other questions, we'll be right over there.
Round of applause for Dale.